The damp, heavy linen dragged across the wooden planks of the boat, smelling of salt, sweat, and failure. Simon Peter scrubbed the empty nets in the shallow water, his muscles screaming from a night of brutal, unrewarded labor. The coarse ropes tore at his calloused hands, and the cold morning mist clung to his skin. He was a professional fisherman who had caught absolutely nothing. The rhythmic lap of the waves against the hull felt like a mocking metronome, keeping time with his racing, anxious thoughts. If you are sitting in the ashes of your own exhausted efforts right now, staring at an empty net after doing everything right, this exact moment was recorded just for you. Perhaps you know the heavy, suffocating weight of that morning mist. Perhaps you know what it feels like to stare at the ceiling at 3 a.m, listening to the silence of a heaven that feels entirely shut against you. Most believers look at seasons of profound emptiness and immediately assume they have stepped out of the will of God. We are conditioned by modern church culture to believe that obedience always looks like instant abundance, overflowing joy, and immediate success. The common misconception is that if you are doing what God called you to do, your nets will always be full, your energy will always be boundless, and your spirit will never grow tired. Why do we always assume exhaustion is a sign of failure? We mistakenly treat exhaustion as a sin and an empty net as a sign of divine disapproval. We pull out scriptures about prosperity and favor, using them like a bandage to cover up the very real, very human experience of total depletion. But that theology completely falls apart on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. Peter wasn't out of God's will when he caught nothing. He was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was trained to do, and he still came up completely empty. Consider the prophet Elijah. After calling down fire from heaven on Mount Carmel, a supreme moment of spiritual victory, he immediately fled into the wilderness. He wasn't running in triumph. He was running for his life, smelling the phantom smoke of Jezebel's threats. He collapsed under a solitary broom tree in the scorching heat of the desert, the gritty sand clinging to his sweat-drenched robes. He asked God to take his life. Elijah was entirely spent physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And how did God respond to this profound exhaustion? He didn't thunder from the heavens with a rebuke about Elijah's lack of faith. He didn't preach a sermon on toxic positivity. He sent an angel to bake bread on hot coals, provided a jar of cool water, and let the prophet sleep. God met Elijah's depletion with profound, sensory grace. We need to dismantle the punishing lie that your current season of burnout is a punishment for a lack of faith. God doesn't view your empty net as a failure. In fact, Scripture reveals that God intentionally uses the exact moment of your absolute depletion as the necessary starting point for His greatest miracles. The emptiness isn't a penalty. It is a preparation. The first truth we must uncover is that your human limitation is the very canvas God prefers to paint on. Look closely at the interaction in Luke chapter 5. Verse 5. Simon answered him, "Master, we have worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." Notice the raw honesty in Peter's voice. He doesn't try to spiritualize his failure. He doesn't pretend he isn't exhausted. He states the brutal facts of his reality. We have worked hard all night. This wasn't a casual hobby for Peter. This was his livelihood, his identity, his area of greatest expertise. He knew those waters better than anyone. He knew the shifts in the wind, the temperature of the currents, the exact spots where the fish were supposed to gather. First-century fishing was an agonizing physical endeavor, casting heavy, lead-weighted nets into the black water, pulling them up soaked and heavy, only to find them devoid of life, over and over again, until the sun began to bleed over the horizon. And yet, despite all his knowledge, all his physical strength, and all his relentless effort, he had nothing to show for it. Maybe you are standing exactly where Peter stood on that water. You have poured your heart into a marriage, a business, a ministry, or a child, and despite doing everything right, you are staring at an empty net. You have prayed the prayers, you have fasted, you have sought wise counsel, you have worked late into the night until your eyes burned and your hands ached. You know the exact sensation of typing and deleting a text message to a prodigal child, the tears hot and stinging in your eyes. You know the hollow ache in your chest as you stare at a stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter, realizing the math simply does not work. And still, nothing. The silence of the empty net is deafening. It whispers lies into your ear, telling you that your efforts are wasted and your future is barren. But Peter's response to Jesus changes everything. He acknowledges his complete depletion, but he doesn't let it have the final word. He pivots from his own exhaustion to the authority of Christ. But because you say so, this is the turning point of faith. Faith isn't denying the reality of your empty net. Faith is looking at the empty net, feeling the bone-deep exhaustion of a fruitless night, and still choosing to drop the net one more time simply because of who is asking. Your depletion isn't a barrier to God's power. It is the very prerequisite for it. The second profound truth hidden in this story is found in the specific instruction Jesus gives to a tired fisherman. Before the miracle happens, there is a command that makes absolutely no logical sense. In Luke chapter 5, verse 4, we read, "When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, 'Put out into deep water, and let down the nets for a catch.'" To fully grasp the absurdity of this command, you must understand the sensory reality of the moment. Jesus, a carpenter by trade, whose hands were calloused from wood and stone, was giving fishing instructions to a master fisherman. Fish in the Sea of Galilee were caught at night, in the cool shallows. Now, the morning sun was blazing, casting a harsh, blinding glare across the water. The fish would have retreated to the cold, unreachable depths to escape the heat. To push out into the deep water in the middle of the day with heavy linen nets was an invitation to public humiliation. The other fishermen on the shore were watching. They were washing their own nets, fully aware that the night's window of opportunity had closed. This mirrors the biblical narrative of Naaman, the mighty Syrian commander who suffered from leprosy. When he sought healing, the prophet Elisha told him to go wash in the Jordan River 7 times. Naaman was furious. The Jordan was notoriously muddy, thick with brown silt and reeds. He had pristine, crystal-clear rivers back in Damascus. The command made no logical sense. It required Naaman to strip off his armor, expose his rotting, diseased skin to his servants, and step into dirty water. The miracle required a profound surrender of his pride and his own logic. The sensory humiliation of the muddy water was the exact threshold to his miraculous restoration. Where is Jesus asking you to launch into the deep water today? Perhaps you are being asked to forgive someone when every fiber of your being demands justice. And the very thought of extending grace feels like stepping into a blinding, uncomfortable glare. Perhaps you are being asked to keep serving in absolute obscurity, washing the feet of those who do not even notice your sacrifice. Perhaps the Lord is telling you to apply for that job, start that ministry, or reach out to that estranged family member. Even though all conventional wisdom says the timing is entirely wrong, the command of Christ will often contradict the expertise of your experience. When God is preparing a miracle, He will frequently ask you to do something that bypasses your intellect, so that your reliance rests entirely on His word. When Peter surrenders his logic and drops the net into the deep, the response of heaven is immediate and violent. The scriptures say they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Imagine the sudden, terrifying jolt on the thick ropes in Peter's blistered hands. Imagine the water, moments ago dead and placid, suddenly boiling with a frenzy of silver scales. The frantic shouting, the sound of snapping flax as the woven nets groaned under an impossible weight. They had to signal their partners in the other boat to come help, and both boats were filled so full that the wood creaked and they began to sink under the sheer mass of the blessing. This is what happens when the authority of Christ intersects with the obedience of an exhausted believer. When God finally moves, He doesn't just meet the quota. He overwhelms the capacity. He provides a catch so staggering that it completely eclipses the agony of the empty night. But notice the ultimate resolution of this miracle. It was never actually about the fish. When Peter saw the overwhelming abundance, he didn't pull out a ledger to calculate his newly acquired wealth. He didn't celebrate his massive success. Instead, the sensory reality of the divine brought him to his knees. He fell into the muck, the slime, and the thrashing fish at Jesus' knees and cried out, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." The miracle of the full net was simply God's chosen instrument to capture Peter's heart. Jesus looked at the trembling fisherman, surrounded by the greatest catch of his life, and said, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." God is using your empty net to bring you to the end of yourself, so that you can discover the beginning of Him. He is letting you feel the weight of your own limitations so that when the sudden, violent jerk of His provision finally hits your ropes, you will know without a shadow of a doubt that it was not by your strength, your intellect, or your strategy. So, if you are washing your empty nets today, do not abandon the shore. Feel the exhaustion. Acknowledge the depletion. But keep your eyes fixed on the Master. He is stepping into your boat, and He is about to ask you to launch out into the deep one more time.